Coming up on this episode,
there's never just a normal Christian dad that's shown earning a living for his things like from the Bambi movie, man is in the forest. Man is in the forest. So they were scared of Walt's. Do we want our kids to be entertained by Satanists? Hey everyone, welcome. Disney has always been spiritual poison. Yes, we are going to show you that Disney has not just gotten bad lately, but it's always been bad for you and your kids. And our goal is to expose evil that is in plain sight to save kids from being preyed upon. Now, this episode is brought to you by babylonexodus.com. Go to babylonexodus.com. Sign up for our newsletter. We send out a lot of great information occasionally, so you'll enjoy that. Now, let's open this matrix. For the thumbnail of this video, I put the poison apple that was in the original Snow White, very famous, but I think that's a very applicable metaphor for Disney itself, and a very persuasive argument that Disney is that poisonous apple that people have been feeding to their children and themselves for decades. Before we get into the history of Walt Disney and some of the examples of why you should avoid Disney, the first thing I want to do is tell you I'm not really judging anyone harshly for going to Disney parks or for consuming the content, because I grew up with that. I've probably been there, 5-6 times in my life, as recently as about 5 years ago. And so I'm not necessarily judging you harshly for that. But this is a challenging topic because Disney has saturated the psyche and the culture of America and of the world. And so we're going to make an effort today to break that hold if it still has you and your kids, and to convince you that you should cut ties with Disney immediately. Now, if you think about Disney features, they often show sorcery and magic. And I just wanted to show and share how the Lord takes witchcraft, sorcery, and magic, those kinds of things, very seriously. I'm just going to read a few random verses from the Bible, which I think are very instructive. Here's one, quote, "But the fearful and unbelieving, the abominable, murderers, whoremongers, and sorcerers, idolaters, and all liars shall have their part in the lake which burns with fire and brimstone, which is the second death." Another one, end quote. Here's another one, quote, "And he caused his children to pass through the fire in the valley of the son of Hinnom. He observed times and used enchantments, used witchcraft, and dealt with a familiar spirit, and with wizards. He wrought much evil in the sight of the Lord to provoke him to anger." End quote. Here's another one. Quote, "Now the works of the flesh are manifest, which are these: adultery, fornication," goes on, "witchcraft, seditions, heresies, envyings, so on and so forth." It says, "Of the like, I tell you before, as I've told you in the past, that they which do these things shall not inherit the kingdom of God." Okay, so those are just a few verses that really clearly show how the Lord, God, feels about sorcery, witchcraft, magic, those kinds of things. So as you listen to this broadcast, think about how many of the shows, movies, cartoons that Disney has, that's what it's all about. And that's just a really clear example of how God feels about it. So something to think about next time you view that Disney movie. And if you go through the Bible from the beginning to the end, there are tons of verses about witchcraft and sorcery, enchantments, familiar spirits, wizards even, and so on and so forth. Now, let's talk a little bit about Disney himself, Walt Disney. I looked up the meaning of the name Walt. And Walt is of German origin, and it means rule or army. So I find that interesting. Walt means army. And then he was married to a woman named Lillian, and that comes from a French word, just has to do with the flower lilies. However, it can also mean innocent, purity, and beauty. And so putting Walt and Lillian together as an army of innocence, purity, or beauty is kind of a good metaphor. And it's fascinating how God names things, and how Satan names things, and how these things come together. It's cosmic in my view. Disney had two daughters. One was adopted. It didn't seem to be much of a family man, but I think that comes from his childhood, and I want to share what his childhood was like. Now, in his early life, Walter Elias Disney was the fourth son of Elias Disney, who was many, many things. I don't know if he was good at them, but he was a carpenter, a farmer, a building contractor, and so on and so forth. And his wife, Flora, had been a public school teacher. And so when Walt was little, more than an infant, the family moved. And then a few years later, his restless father soon abandoned his effort at farming and moved the family again. So what you see is this habit of Elias, who's reportedly by his sons an alcoholic, abusive, moving the family all over the place. In 1917, the Disneys moved back to Chicago. And so Walt worked with his father on a paper route, and he says that the many habits and compulsions of his adult life stemmed from the disciplines and discomforts of helping his father with the paper route. So his dad was rough. He was obviously, he needed alcohol, and there was an abusive situation there by Walt's account and others. And so with a kind of a traumatic, tumultuous childhood, moving back and forth, I think that is an interesting insight into who Walt Disney is, because you're going to see that in his life, he was traumatized. And then you've got this traumatized person from an alcoholic family who goes on to found this major corporation who produces children's literature and movies. And you think, that's an interesting thing to do when your childhood was as it was. And so anyway, Disney said, speaking of religion, he said, quote, "I believe firmly in the efficacy of religion, in its powerful influence on a person's whole life. It helps immeasurably to meet the storms and stress of life and keep you attuned to the divine inspiration. Without inspiration, we would perish," end quote. Well, he's true. We do need inspiration. Proverbs says that without vision, the people perish. And I think that he was a visionary. He was a very, visual person, and he was very creative. But what divine inspiration was Walt Disney channeling? It's interesting to look at his productions. So to start off, Walt Disney's first movie was Alice in Wonderland, Down the Rabbit Hole. It was similar to Roger the Rabbit movie, where it was a live-action film of a lady in an animated environment. So it's trying to combine those things as early as 1923. So right out of the gate, Walt Disney is going down the rabbit hole with Alice in Wonderland. The next movie was Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, which was in 1937, and that was the first full-length animated feature featuring cell animation. So Disney was always pushing the boundaries, was always moving technology forward and trying things. So there's no doubt Walt Disney was creative. However, he had a lot of struggles when he first started, and the only way that Disney stayed in business during World War II was to produce propaganda movies. In fact, it says Disney employees created educational films for various federal agencies, including a 1942 animated short, quote, "The New Spirit," end quote. Now, this was commissioned by the federal government's Treasury Department to encourage people to pay their income taxes as a way to support the war effort. You can look this video up. But that's no joke. He literally was hired by the Treasury Department to get people to pay income tax, which is fundamentally immoral. The Founding Fathers were against income taxes. Anyway, this film, which starred Donald Duck, was shown in thousands of movie theaters and earned an Academy Award nomination. The Disney studio also made training films for the American military and created free of charge more than 1,000 insignias for military units. And the design centered around established Disney characters as well as new characters. Now, did Disney have a problem being a propagandist for war? Well, initially he was reluctant to risk tarnishing his image as a non-political entertainer by producing blatantly propagandistic works. His team eventually turned out animated shorts such as 1943's, quote, "Der Führer's Face," end quote, which made fun of Nazis and again starred Donald Duck. Additionally, after reading the 1942 bestseller Victory Through Air Power by Major Alexander de Seversky, Disney driven by his own patriotism, decided to adapt it as a 1943 live-action animated feature of the same name in order to win support for the book's theories. It was considered controversial by some military officials about strategic long-range bombing. Both President Franklin Roosevelt and British Prime Minister Winston Churchill saw the film, which reportedly made an impression on them. I will say FDR and Winston Churchill I am not a fan of at all. I do believe they were tools of the devil, and they did some very terrible things. I know that goes against maybe what you thought about World War II, but I believe all wars have been a racket, and people who have served in them will back that up. So you see that in order to stay in business, Disney was willing to basically sell out. He was willing to propagandize. And he, with his comment and quote on religion, like he was kind of just accepting of everything from what I was able to garner. And so he didn't really have a strong moral foundation. He did believe in a higher power, but he basically didn't go to church. He wasn't much of a family man. So essentially, that is the moral moorings of Walt Disney. Is he just kind of was mushy on moral issues. I have a video called The Two Sides of Walt Disney, which shows that Disney was kind of a tyrant. He was like a Steve Jobs character, very driven, very visionary, but he was also a nightmare to work for. They said, a lot of his artists said that when he would come to the office, he would cough, but not because he was a smoker. It was to let everyone know, all hands on deck. Disney's in the building. And they would say things like from the Bambi movie, man is in the forest, man is in the forest. So they were scared of Walt. They didn't say that in the interviews, but you could tell it was a hostile and toxic working environment, which is another weird thing to think that a company around children's entertainment, the owner and master, if you will, was very toxic. So to have children's movies come out of that environment is very fascinating to me. Basically, let's fast forward a little bit. In 2005, Disney issued an official statement about Harvey Weinstein, because Miramax and Disney were partnered. They said they had no idea about Weinstein and his actions, but we know they did. In fact, I've created quite a list for you to start to view this content of the fact that Disney will work with anybody. And they, look at the Guardians of the Galaxy movies. James Gunn posted some of the most sexually deviant material on Twitter about children, and they've hired him to make all three Guardians of the Galaxy movies. They had one of the writers who wrote a lot of the songs for Little Mermaid died of AIDS. You can probably guess why. So there's a lot of examples of that. We're going to get into those a little bit later, but suffice it to say, Disney will work with whoever will get the job done for their agenda and to help them make money. So before we go into the next point of this broadcast, I want to encourage you, if you're finding this content useful or interesting, go over to Venmo. You can throw us a tip. You can find us at thefirestarter on Venmo if you want to give us a little contribution for putting this together for you today. Okay, now let's get into the second part of this broadcast. I'm going to talk about examples of Disney's corruption. So one of the things that I've found in the Disney movies is there's a lot of themes that are consistent. I think the anthropomorphization of animals is one of the most wicked and effective tricks that Disney has. And what is anthropomorphization? Well, that's making animals talk and have human expressions. And as you see in movies like Bambi and others, you see that they are excellent. Lion King, there's so many where they are able to get animals to have human characteristics. And if you really start to put an eye to it, you'll start to see that there are many examples of where they are in seductive or provocative conversations, poses, interactions between animals that are quite nasty if you were to actually show humans doing that to kids. And I'll give a few examples. If you want to maybe look at a really obvious example, Maleficent, which came out in 2010, which was a renewing or a retelling of the classic Sleeping Beauty movie, which is one of the few movies which actually used the word righteousness, and the knight had a cross on his shield. Well, this new retelling of Sleeping Beauty, Maleficent literally means causing harm or destruction, especially by supernatural means. So you have the hero of the story, quote-unquote hero, who is literally a demon with giant horns. and wings. And in this movie, this character, Maleficent, has her wings cut off, and that's part of her motivation for getting revenge on the humans. But I would cut her wings off. I'd cut off her horns, too. If you watch that trailer to Maleficent and Angelina Jolie and the singing, they slow down that original Sleeping Beauty song. It is so demonic and evil, but yet I had family members and friends who just thought it was amazing. And I just thought, at the time, I didn't quite put it together, but that was 13 years ago, and a lot has changed. Other things, like Bambi really taught kids that hunting is bad and that man is evil and opposed to nature. As a kid, I remember being frightened of the end scenes when the fire was started by the carelessness of humans. They started a forest fire by accident. Or man is in the woods. And that was the Bambi's, the buck, the head buck or whatever was shot and killed. And so as a kid with parents and family members who hunted, I just remember that messaging that guns are bad, humans are bad, and they kill. And so that's been there since the beginning. Frozen 2, Encanto, those are some more modern movies. They sucked so bad. I remember looking at the plot holes for those, but also just the gender confusion and the stories. I just feel like there's no hero's journey anymore where there's a clear villain and there's a clear arc for the main character to overcome evil. And there's definitely never any mention of God or Christ in these movies. Never. I looked for it. There was one one video on YouTube that had about 10 instances of secret hidden Christian messages, but it's very sparse, very sparse. There was something in like Excalibur, that movie, and a couple others, but yeah, it's just not there in the Disney canon. There's no mention of Christ in anything. Gender confusion is a big thing with Disney, and you see it not only in their movies where the princess motif, that huge, I mean, the princesses have made Disney so much money, and so many girls have tailored their life towards that, you know, as they grow up watching those movies and wearing those costumes and playing with those toys. But if you really analyze it, Frozen's a great example, as I mentioned. The messaging to girls now is so genderless that it completely undermines all femininity and makes the girls into a masculine figure. So they make them like guys, which is kind of ironic that the feminist movement is so huge. Disney is literally turning girls into men, or at least caricatures of men. I remember last year seeing a Disney worker at one of the parks dressed up as a woman greeting little children, and I thought, that's quite devious because people pay so much money to come into that park, and yet what do they do? And so anyway, it's just, you've got to stay away from it. Other things I've seen in Disney movies like Fantasia and Dumbo and others is drug use and getting drunk or being high. Like you can see that so clearly that that's a big part of things, is showing to kids the fun aspects of being high or inebriated, but really it's so deceitful. But it's something that's done with cute animals and characters, and so it gets a pass. One thing that my wife Kelly said is that in the Disney productions, there is either always a missing dad or the dad is extremely stupid. There's never just a normal Christian dad that's shown living a good life and leading his kids in righteousness. It's always he's either dead or he's stupid or he works for the state. And in those multiverse movies, which I hate, by the way, I hate the Spider-Man multiverse movies. I thought they were terrible. The dads they die, or they're evil, or they have to be saved. So it's this inversion of parents to kids relation where the kids are empowered and the parents are weak. Okay, so now let's get a little more specific with some of the things that we've seen from Disney. We've had, as I was saying at the beginning of this broadcast, there have been dozens and dozens of arrests of Disney employees at theme parks over the years. Disney has knowingly hired predators. One example, in 2017, 35 were arrested. But you can follow the history of this, and I have links to it, of just how many times. We're talking vice presidents, we're talking heads of divisions who are arrested for child pornography, trafficking children, propositioning them. Like, it's just disgusting. But that's not all there is to this. Recently, last year, and you may have seen this, is the president of Disney came out, and she said of her two children, and I think she's a she, honestly, I don't know. She kind of looked like a man to me, but that's a whole nother topic. But the Disney executive, and I have an article here, it says, quote, Disney executive who is the mother of a transgender and a pansexual child says she wants at least half of all future characters to be LGBTQIA or racial minorities. Theme parks are now banned from saying, hello, boys and girls. I'm here as the mother of two queer children, actually one transgender child and one pansexual child, and also as a leader, she said. And during the same hands-on meeting, this comes from a meeting Disney held, television animation executive producer LaToya Ravenel gushed about Disney's inclusivity and boasted about adding queerness to shows and productions. Our leadership over there has been so welcoming of my not-so-secret gay agenda. Wherever I could, I was adding queerness. No one would stop me, and no one was trying to stop me. So they have, end quote, so they have promised to continue to add transgender characters or characters of different persuasions, basing them on race and other qualities, sexual qualities, to their movies. So this is a big deal for Disney. And I wanted to say is that, would you have adults who have gender confusion or teach children this confusion? Would you have them babysit your children? You know you wouldn't. Would you have them teach your children their morality? You absolutely would not. And I think this falls under these scriptures I shared when we first started this. This is witchcraft. This is sorcery. This is spelling, I mean, it's literally called Hollywood. It's called broadcasting. Like, it is a spellcraft, which is used to deceive children. And then we wonder why so many children have problems nowadays. How many millions of people have consumed this content? Disney World is the world's allegedly most popular vacation spot. 58 million people visit that every year. How many of those people who visit do you think are Christians who would reject what the president of Disney is saying? You literally have a woman, allegedly, saying that her two little children are transgender and pansexual. People couldn't even define what pansexual is. Pansexual means you'll have sex with any gender, that there are many, many genders, and that you could be attracted to any of them. So it's already based on delusion. But you have someone running a major media corporation, the biggest probably in the world, which creates children's entertainment. Now, that's not all there is. There is an individual who is named Charlie Cora, a member of the Disney family, who came out publicly as transgender and condemned the so-called anti-LGBTQ bills in Florida that we heard about last year. Now, Cora, who uses he and they pronouns, announced that their family, that's the article using that, their family, this is a woman pretending to be a man. I'm a man. You don't get to be a man. God determines men and male and female. And so the fact that the article is using they to describe this person, this woman, is really, really just an obvious propaganda piece. But let's go on. Cora announced that the family would match up to $250,000 in donations to the Human Rights Campaign, one of the most evil organizations in the world. I added that part. Continuing, quote, the nation's largest LGBT advocacy group during the organization's annual gala in Los Angeles last month. Roy P. Disney, Cora's stepfather and the grandson of Roy Disney, who was a co-founder of Disney Company, upped that amount to $500,000 last week. Equality matters deeply to us, Roy said in a statement according to the Los Angeles Times, quote, especially because of our child Charlie is transgender and a proud member of the LGBTQ plus community. So we see that that's where the Disney family is at. Now, the best thing that you can do is not consume their content, which we'll discuss in the last section of this. But the point is, this is someone who came out as a high school science teacher, who regrets not having done more to advocate against Florida's bill limiting LGBTQ classroom discussion. So anyway, that's who you're giving money to. You need to keep that in mind. Roy P. Disney, in this article, the last part, says his family wants to make a donation in part because the Human Rights Campaign refused to accept a $5 million donation announced last month. Jody Madison, the group's interim president, said that HRC wants to see Disney, quote, build on their public commitment and work with LGBTQ plus advocates to ensure the dangerous proposals like Florida's, quote, don't say gay or trans bill, end quote, don't become dangerous laws. And if they do, to work to get them off the books. And this is the final argument made by Sherry Disney, which is Charlie's mother, who said the matching donation was meant to remind people that LGBTQ children need support. I have a trans kid, and I love my kid no matter what, she told the LA Times. That's always the tactic, emotion. There's never any spiritual justification, biblical justification. God's word is never invoked. It's always, I have this child and I have emotions towards my child. Therefore, we're going to take our millions and millions of dollars, throw it to this, and we're going to continue to saturate the world with these wicked things. And speaking of wicked, if you ever looked at the name Mickey and you put it upside down and reverse it, it literally says wicked. Like the way that they do the artistic version of Mickey literally says wicked when it's upside down and inverted. That's not by chance. I'm an artist. I'm creative. That would be designed. Or the devil pulled off one of the greatest pranks ever, but I highly doubt that. And so finishing up this part of the broadcast, before we go into what we can do about Disney, I want you to look up on YouTube or some video platform you use, the Coachman's Proposition, just Pinocchio, the Coachman's Proposition. So you'll see this interesting video, and I remember as a kid is that the coachman is talking with the fox, and they're talking about how they can literally traffic boys by kidnapping them, sending them to Pleasure Island, and then when they come back, they won't come back as boys. If that wasn't child trafficking, Satanism right in your face, nothing will convince you to abandon Disney. Speaking of the last final point of this broadcast, abandoning Disney, what do we do about it? What I'd like you to do is I'd like you to go do a search on your browser for the, quote, gay agenda, end quote, at Disney. Just do it. Or you can go on Google, or you can go on rumble.com, and I have links in this broadcast. But you can see what the future agenda is. It's more transhumanism, and it's Luciferianism, and it's just very obvious nowadays. One thing that I came across is that Disney literally produced a show called Little Demon, which was normalizing Satanism. How? Well, the little girl who's the main character is literally the daughter of the devil, and she's the Antichrist. And so that's the actual subject matter of the cartoon. And its trailer is as bad as you think. I wouldn't recommend you go watch it. Just take my word for it on this one topic. There's a lot of other videos that I looked up. 18 dirty Disney movie jokes you totally missed. Disney teaches kids that men can have periods. Now on Rumble, I found several good videos. One that's called Disney Dark History with Kids. It's not just Harvey Weinstein, and it keeps happening. Another one, Disney, the Ultimate Parasite. And then there's another one, Who Was Walt Disney? 55 specific examples of corruption. So, is Disney safe for Christians? Well, let's talk about this. We've discussed it. We know it isn't. So what do? We see these movies which have no righteous portrayals of men. We see that when religion is showcased, we see like Frollo in The Hunchback of Notre Dame singing a number about called Hellfire, which is about wanting to sleep with a gypsy. So he's a religious figure who's very evil. Nothing like the actual book Hunchback of Notre Dame, which I've read some, and there's a musical. There's a little more texture there, and he's flawed, but he's not this cartoon cutout evil villain like they show in The Hunchback. So when you see these things, you know you've got to abandon it. So the first thing I want to put forward is when you do not withhold and abstain from this content, your kids have the costumes, the video games, the clothing, you go to the parks, you're making it harder not only on your children but on your community, because as a Christian parent who's rejecting Babylon, your kids' friends, if they continue to consume it, it makes it hard for you. And it makes it harder for other Christian parents who are trying to do the same thing. Let go of Babylon. Disney is the worst thing that you can give to your kids. Another thing is if you see movies in the park, like we've had those in our communities where the city government or whatever will show a movie in the park, and we'll take our blankets and things. If it's a Disney movie, either don't go, or I would recommend reaching out to the city and expressing that we don't want Disney in our community. And if you have to explain it, send them this video. That's fine. So it's a real challenge. Also, you want to look up subsidiary companies that Disney own. You don't want to support them financially, both going to the parks, buying the merchandise or the content, going to movies. But you also don't want to support companies that are blatantly in the pocket of Disney. Now, the last thing I want to do is do something I've not seen in videos about Disney. You can find a ton of content against Disney, and it's just so obvious it's evil for our families as Christians. But I also would recommend that when you see stars that have been through the Disney grinder, like Lindsay Lohan, Katy Perry, Justin Timberlake, Miley Cyrus, Britney Spears, these people have a huge impact on the world, and you can see right where they've gone. The first thing we do is we point and we condemn. But I would recommend next time you fast that put some of these stars on your list and fast for them and pray for them. There was kind of a big star named Kat Von D. She was on a tattoo show a few years ago. But I saw recently she got baptized, and she's covered with tattoos. In fact, she covered all her tattoos with ink and now has just solid black arms. It's pretty trippy looking, but she posted on Instagram that she got baptized. Now, I don't know how sincere it is, but that's good. That's good to proclaim Christ and to pray for those people who parents sold them out, who just were taken advantage of. We know how much, or at least we've heard a lot about the molestation that goes on in Hollywood. And so that's what I think we should do is for these people. And if you ever see this, if one of these stars ever see this video, I just want you to know that God still loves you and that He has your back. He will welcome you back and He'll lead you to Christ. And Christ is King, and Christ is ultimately freedom. And that's what we want for our kids. We want freedom from this satanic crap that Lucifer keeps peddling upon our communities and upon the church and the kingdom of God. That's our episode. What do you think? Are you mad? Are you fired up? I mean, I hope so, but I hope you'll look into it and you'll check out the links that I've provided with this broadcast. I want you to follow us. Open the Matrix Podcast is on all the social platforms, video and audio, so you can always get our content. Share it with family and friends. babylonexodus.com. A reminder to go visit our website, sign up for our newsletter. We really appreciate the support. If you want to give us a tip for this content, go on Venmo, thefirestarter. That's me, thefirestarter. I appreciate that because this is a lot of work and we want to keep doing it regardless, but we do appreciate the support. All right, I want to end today's episode with a poem that I once wrote called I Want This More. And I share this because we have to decide what we want more. Do we want our kids to be entertained by Satanists, or do we want to give them a better life than that? So it goes like this. Here in the long night, a straight road before me, this blind child lets go of the looking glass. Standing at the edge of the dream, little seekers looking for the sun. So when the darkness grabs us by the core, we'll say, I want this more. I want this more. Thanks for joining us for this episode. We'll see you next time.